Well, welcome back, and we're a couple days removed from the Saints winning the Super Bowl. I imagine people on Bourbon Street are still celebrating, to put it mildly. We're going to recap that and start taking a look at the next season. Can they repeat? Can the Colts get back? Introduce my great panel here. Les Carpenter, he was in New Orleans for the revelry. We'll get your thoughts. Charley, Casserly, former GM of the Skins, and J.I. Halsell. Worked for the Redskins for a long time, salary cap guy. We're going to talk about some of those football things. Football Outsiders, let's do some work at ESPN.
Correct.
It's a great time to be a Saints fan. I don't think they ever saw this coming. Charley, I want to start with you. I haven't got your thoughts on the Super Bowl itself, but I would imagine if you were a Saints fan and you said, well, we could hold the Colts to 17, we could win the turnover battle, and get a big special teams play, we have a chance to win this thing. And that's exactly what happened.
That'd be a lock if somebody told you that right there. Holding the 17 would be a lock, too. But, you know, going into the game, I thought the Saints had a great chance to win because outstanding quarterback, outstanding offense. The way you beat the Colts is you got to be aggressive. You got to be able to score points. If you can't score points, you can't beat the Colts. I thought that you had a situation where both offenses were better than both defenses, so I thought you were going to have a high-scoring game. Whoever had the ball at the end of the game would win the game, probably. I thought the key was this for the Colts. Freeney was not the factor that he has been, and at the end of the day, they were playing with the backup corners. So that's a bad matchup if you're playing an offense like the Saints.
And we saw some gutsy play calling over there by Sean Payton. Absolutely. And maybe a little conservatism by the Colts. I don't know if it's easy to pin on that, but the way that game played out, the decisions that Sean Payton made worked very well.
I mean, if you could have named a co-MVP and had that, you know, that person be a non-player, you'd have to say Sean Payton was definitely, you know, worthy of that. When you look at just, you know, the tactical decisions he made, I mean, it takes a lot of courage to make that decision to go for the onside kick coming out of the halftime. And then you look at his clock management even at the end of the first half. When they missed on that fourth down and then turned the ball over on downs, to still be able to get the ball back and then go down and get a field goal at the end of the half was huge. And that's, you know, that's great. A great job on his part of just managing the clock at the end of the half. So, you know, Drew Brees definitely gets the MVP, but a lot of credit definitely goes to Sean Payton.
Unless you talk about how the way they structured this team, though, you know, there's some guys that it's just, you know, we know Bush was a big-time pick, but and Brees was a free agent, but Marcus Colson does not make a lot of money. He was a 7th-round pick. Darren Sharper, I think, got $1.7 million this year. They've been very smart with building this roster cap-wise to put themselves in a position to have some freedom going forward.
Definitely. I mean, you look at Lance Moore, you know, he's an undrafted rookie free agent. You look at Pierre Thomas, undrafted rookie free agent. Mike Bell's the guy who they got off the street prior to the season. And you look at offensively, all of those guys were big-time contributors for them this season. And now defensively, to Charlie's point, you know, yeah, you're going to have to probably address that defense because, you know, even in terms of their statistical ranking, they're in the bottom quarter of the league. Yeah. And, you know, you can't, you know, just kind of shoulder, you know, thinking that you're going to continue to get turnovers to change the game. And so you probably do in the offseason need to build that team. Probably in this offseason, given, you know, the restrictions of free agency, you're going to have to build that defense to the draft.
As for the top 5 pick, it can be a good or a bad thing. It's huge investment. If there's a thought there, J.I., that all right, there's not a player we're really in love with. It's a deep draft that Charley says, do you think of moving back and getting multiple picks since you don't have a 3rd and a 6th?
Yeah, when you think about just the money from a guarantee perspective and looking at the top 8 picks in the draft, you know, that's a significant investment. And if you're looking at potentially taking a quarterback, given kind of, you know, it's boom or bust with quarterbacks that high in the draft, and it's a significant investment, potentially your more conservative thought process would be to go offensive line since it is a position of need. You know, theoretically, if you take, you know, a top-tier offensive lineman at the number 4 overall pick, and yeah, the guy doesn't turn out to be, you know, your left tackle for the next few years, well, he might be your right tackle for the next few years, or he might be a guard. You know, you get something out of him, you know, and that was kind of the thought process with Miami a couple years ago. They took, you know, Jake Long because, you know, with the number 1 overall pick, that's a significant investment. Do you go quarterback or do you go with an offensive lineman? They went with the offensive lineman.
Welcome back. We're talking NFL and the collective bargaining agreement, some other offseason stuff that's coming up. Look like we're going to have an uncapped year. J.I. Halsell used to do salary cap stuff for the Redskins. Now he's an analyst, Football Outsiders. Thanks for coming in again. You're back. And, of course, Charley Casserly is Smoking Al Koken is back with us. Charley, we're going to have an uncapped year, it looks like. If we don't get a deal done by March 5th, safe to say that's not going to happen. Initially, what does that mean for football fans, what they should be watching here?
Well, I think there'll be less activity in free agency because you're going from 4 years to 6 years, which means you're obviously taking a lot of players off the market. I looked at the group of players in this thing, the ones who are free. There's not 5 guys you'd spend money on who are under 30 years old. Okay, that's a sobering effect if you're another team trying to get better. It's a sobering effect for the players.
Interesting that this sort of works against what the perception would be, because if you say uncapped year, oh my God, Jerry Jones and Dan Snyder are going to go buy all the players they can. It doesn't quite work that way. Talk about some of the restrictions and some of the other things that are in this.
Right. As Charlie alluded to, you have to have 6 accrued seasons before you become an unrestricted free agent. So meaning you're going into your 7th season, before you become an unrestricted free agent. Now, those guys who would have been unrestricted, the Jason Campbells of the world, the Carlos Rogers of the world, are instead of being unrestricted, are now restricted free agents. So now you have this tremendous group of players who would have been unrestricted who are now restricted. You have the Final 8 plan, which applies to those teams that made it to the divisional round of the playoffs, whereby those guys cannot sign a player until they lose an unrestricted free agent. And then the contracts, in terms of their first-year salaries, have to match up 1 for 1. Now, the 4 teams that lost in the divisional round, they can sign an unlimited amount of players to contracts that value at $3 million in the first year, and 1 player at a contract of at least $6 million, in the first year. So those 4 teams aren't as restricted as the final 4 teams that made it to the conference championships. Whereas those 4 teams that made it to the conference championships, they have to do that 1 for 1, and then they're really restricted. So, it really puts the clamps on those teams that have been successful in the playoffs in terms of how they're going to kind of rejuvenate their roster for 2010.
Oh, it's interesting, too, because there's, Al, as far as the Redskins go, the only unrestricted free agent they have is the center Casey Robach and the punter Hunter Smith. So they're not going to look at losing a lot of guys. However, you're coming off a 4-12 season. You probably would like some turnover if you're Mike Shanahan. You want to clean some stuff out and get some young guys in here. You're not going to be able to go with an open checkbook and go buy a bunch, though.
No, which is maybe the reason why when Bruce Allen was talking about what this team is going to have moving forward, he said it's the guys in the locker room maybe facing that reality of we're not going to be able to do much out of that. But I'm also curious, J.I. and Charlie, what about teams like maybe in the Redskins in certain situations? Is it a little easier for them to get out of some bad contracts, some things that they may have buyer's remorse about because of, the salary cap, if it was in place, you'd be taking cap hits down the line. Is it easier to get out of it in this uncapped year?
You definitely can. Those contracts that you feel like the contract is outperforming the player in an uncapped year of 2010, theoretically you could terminate that contract and then, have that dead money, and there's no cap, so it's not killing you from a salary cap perspective because there is no cap. However, the thought around the league has been that, at least some of the cap guys I've talked to, is that 2010 could be uncapped, and then a CBA gets done, and then in 2011 the salary cap comes back. And not knowing what those rules are going to be when the salary cap comes back in 2011, those teams that incur high team salaries in 2010 by virtue of signing a bunch of players or by virtue of terminating a whole bunch of contracts, could potentially face some sort of penalty in 2011 when the cap comes back, because those teams who have kind of managed it conservatively are going to, feel that they probably should not come back on the same even footing in 2011 when the cap comes back. So, there could be that conservative, thought process.
Doesn't this also add to the fact that, as important as it always has been to find guys late in the draft, this seems like it's almost a double bonus to get me a Marcus Colston for 3 years before I really have to pony up the dough. But this strikes me now, if I'm a smart franchise, I'm investing my money in scouting. I'm putting more money there now because my bonus off this, again, to J.I.'s point about the uncertain future, we don't know what that cap is going to be. So I better find some talented, cheap labor and a much better source. The Redskins trading down to get more picks. That seems to me, if they're going to be changing this franchise's vision, that's the way to do it.
It seems that your draft has to be the way, has to be your base. And you were talking about these 2 teams that are in the Super Bowl. It's because they found guys like Pierre Garçon and Austin Carley and Ryan Lilja.
Maybe even more so coming into this uncapped future, right?
Yeah,
I think that, in managing team salaries, we'll call it that since there is no salary cap, the thought is that, at the end of the day, it's about cheap labor, as you mentioned. And you look at an Indianapolis Colts, as you mentioned, and you look at, their corners. You see that Peyton Manning and Dallas Clark and all those guys make a ton of money, but for every Peyton Manning and Reggie Wayne and Dallas Clark, there's a Lacey playing corner for them. You know, there's a Melvin Book, there's an Antoine Bethea. You know, and so you have to find, you know, that value. You know,
and another thing, there's all plays in. We talk about this looming labor talks, and whenever I start thinking about this, I start getting that, my head starts spinning. But it boils down to something very simple. The owners believe they're not making enough,
right?
And the players say, you know, whatever, you're making a lot. We're not giving up a chunk of ours. NFLPA Executive Director DeMaury Smith ranked chances of no agreement by March 1st a 14 on a scale of 1 to 10. NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell countered the idea ownership shutting down would be anxious, or that would be false. We don't make money shutting down. Where are we going with this, Charlie?